The Mafia boss declined his ex-wife's call, unaware it was their baby's last goodbye. Drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. Please answer, John. This is your son's last moment. Her voice trembled, raw with fear and desperation. John Rafe, the city's coldest mafia boss, hesitated, unaware that a single unanswered call would change everything. In the next heartbeat, his world shatters. Betrayal, blood, and a secret that will destroy his entire family. What would you do if the one call you ignored became the last goodbye? The night had wrapped itself around the city like a heavy velvet curtain, thick with storm clouds and unspoken danger. Inside the top floor of a secluded glass tower, John Rafe stood alone behind his massive desk, a slab of imported obsidian that reflected the cold edge of the man who owned it. The air smelled faintly of gun oil, expensive whiskey, and the sharp metallic scent of rain hitting steel beams outside. His office was dark, except for the dim glow of monitors displaying numbers, names, territories. The heartbeat of an empire he had built with ruthless precision. John's expression was carved from stone as he skimmed through a coded report. But something beneath his ribs had been restless all evening, like a warning he couldn't interpret. And then, breaking through the hush of the room, his phone vibrated. He didn't look at it immediately. Men like John moved only when necessary. But the vibration didn't stop. It buzzed again, insistent, almost frantic. Finally, he shifted his gaze to the screen, and the world inside him dropped out of place. Julia. Her name cut through him with the sharpness of a blade pulled from old wounds. The soft white glow of her name illuminated the carved tension of his jaw, highlighting the faint scar that traced down his cheek, the one she used to touch without fear. 4.5 years had passed since he walked away from her, leaving behind a woman who loved him fiercely, but deserved a life free of bloodshed. He had disappeared before she learned the full truth. Loving him meant inheriting his enemies. Walking away had been his one attempt at mercy, though it never felt like one. The phone continued to vibrate, softer now, almost pleading. John's fingers twitched slightly, an involuntary response, betraying the storm beneath his controlled exterior. He stared at her name as though it were a ghost clawing its way into the present. Memories rose uninvited, the warmth of her voice, the softness of her laughter, the pain in her eyes the night he left. His chest tightened painfully. She had never called him after he disappeared. Not once. So why now? Why tonight? Why with this urgency that prickled across his skin like static before lightning? He reached toward the phone, then stopped, his hand suspended in midair. Doubt slithered through him. His mind, always analytical, ran through possibilities. Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe she wanted to confront him. Maybe she wanted answers he could no longer give. Maybe she wanted the truth he never allowed her to know. But beneath those rationalizations lurked a quieter, more fragile truth. He wasn't prepared to confront. He wasn't sure he could hear her voice without cracking. Pride, guilt, and fear spun together like tangled wires inside him. Slowly, almost painfully, he withdrew his hand. He didn't touch the phone. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He only listened to the call fade into silence, leaving a cold emptiness in its wake. While his silence consumed the room, miles away, Julia was fighting a nightmare made of fluorescent lights and emergency alarms. The hospital air was sharp with the scent of disinfectant and panic, the kind that clings to the walls and settles into bone. Julia stood at the bedside of her little boy, Max, her hands trembling as she held on to him like he was the last drop of light in a collapsing world. Max's skin was pale, almost translucent under the harsh lights, and his lashes fluttered weakly each time he tried to breathe. His small chest rose in uneven, painful jerks that made Julia's own heartbeat stutter with terror. She had not slept in hours, not since he collapsed, not since she realized something was horribly wrong. Her fingers brushed his hair, smoothing it gently as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "Stay with me, baby. Please stay with me," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Her phone was gripped in her other hand so tightly her knuckles burned white. She hit redial. She prayed he'd answer this time. The phone rang in her ear once, twice, 3 times, echoing through the sterile room like a lifeline stretching farther and farther away. "Please, John, pick up. I can't lose him. Not alone." But the call cut off abruptly. He didn't answer. Julia's breath broke in half. Then Max's body began to convulse violently. His small frame jerked as if a current of electricity surged through him. His fingers curled inward, his legs stiffened, and his head tilted back in an unnatural arc. Julia's scream tore from her throat without permission. "Help! Please, someone help!" Nurses rushed in, the room exploding into chaos. One nurse lowered Max's bed rail while another injected medication into his fore. A doctor pressed 2 fingers against Max's neck, calling out numbers. Julia didn't understand. His voice urgent, sharp. Max's eyes rolled upward and foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. Julia felt her knees collapsing beneath her, her world narrowing into the sound of her son fighting for breath. She reached for him, but a nurse held her back gently, whispering, "Let them work." But Julia couldn't breathe. She couldn't blink. Her soul felt like it was being torn open. Back in his office, John had poured a glass of whiskey but hadn't taken a sip. Something kept twisting in his gut, a feeling he hated, one that felt too much like fear. He didn't understand it, but his instincts, the instincts that had kept him alive all these years, were screaming quietly. He stared at the phone again, replaying the memory of her name glowing on the screen. He should have answered. He didn't know why, but he knew it mattered. Before he could make sense of the unease clawing inside him, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID didn't belong to a ghost from his past. It belonged to City General Hospital. John's breath froze. He answered instantly, his voice a low, controlled growl. "Rafe." Silence filled the other end for a moment too long, and that silence alone made John's heart pound harder. Finally, a voice emerged. A woman's voice, small, trembling, young. "Sir, this is Nurse Elise from City General. I am calling because Julia is here." John's pulse spiked, adrenaline flooding his veins so fast it made him dizzy. The nurse inhaled shakily before continuing as if bracing herself. "She's asking for you, and she's not alone. There's a little boy with her, 4 years old." The words hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His mind raced. 4 years old, a boy. Julia. Why him? Why ask for him? Why now? The nurse's voice wavered, barely steady. "Sir, please come immediately. It's urgent. Very urgent." John felt something hollow, something terrifying, carve itself into his chest. And then the final blow. The nurse swallowed hard, her voice cracking down the middle as she forced out the words she didn't want to say. "Sir, the boy might not make it through the night." The world around John blurred into nothing but that sentence. The air thinned. His vision darkened at the edges. His hand tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over him, deeper and sharper than anything he'd felt on battlefields or under sniper fire. Something inside him that had been dormant for years began to wake, violent and unrestrained. And for the first time in his life, the man who controlled entire territories felt an emotion he had no strategy for: raw, consuming fear. And somewhere inside that fear, a whisper he couldn't escape. What if that boy was his, too? The moment the nurse's words hung in Jay's ears, his entire body erupted into motion. His hand slammed down on the edge of the desk, shattering the silence of the office as though he could shatter time itself. His pulse pounded violently, a primal rhythm echoing in his skull, faster than he had felt since childhood nights, hiding from shadows he couldn't name. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause, didn't allow his mind to weigh the consequences. He moved like a man possessed, driven by a force more powerful than fear, more relentless than instinct. His armored car waited outside, sleek and black, a rolling fortress he trusted more than most men alive. He yanked the door open and dove inside, the wet hiss of the rain outside blending with the roar of his own heartbeat. "City General." Now he barked, his voice tight, clipped, an order that left no room for argument. The driver, a man who had navigated through gunfire and explosions without flinching, nodded quickly, sensing the storm that had overtaken his boss. The engine roared to life, tires screeching slightly on the slick road as the car launched forward, slicing through the rain like a blade. Water lashed against the armored windshield in relentless sheets, distorting the world outside into a blurred chaos of neon lights, splashing puddles and flickering street lamps. Each drop felt like an accusation, a reminder of every year he had been absent. Every laugh he had missed, every breath he hadn't shared with the boy he didn't even know existed. Luca, his right-hand man, sat stiffly in the seat beside him. He had served John for nearly a decade, loyal to the point of obsession, and he knew when words could be dangerous and when silence was heavier. And yet, as John's hands gripped the wheel like claws digging into steel, Luca hesitated before speaking. "Boss, that boy. The age matches." The words spoken softly reverberated through the car as though they had weight beyond language. John didn't respond. He couldn't. His lungs felt tight. His chest heavy. Every second stretching like a rope being pulled taut. He wasn't just racing toward a hospital. He was racing toward a truth he wasn't ready to face, yet couldn't avoid. The storm outside had grown fiercer. Rain battered the armored car with such force that it felt as though the heavens themselves were screaming warnings. Lightning split the sky above, illuminating Jay's grim face in stark, jagged shadows. His mind replayed the nurse's words over and over. The boy might not make it through the night. Each repetition was a knife against his chest, an echo of the failure he had carried for years, a failure now intensified into a personal apocalypse. He thought of Julia, the woman he had left, the woman who had carried the weight of his absence for nearly 5 years, and he thought of the boy of Max. Unaware, innocent, fragile, and possibly his own blood. The car swerved slightly as the tires met a slick patch of road. John's eyes, sharp and calculating even in fear, scanned the mirrors instinctively. There, a black SUV. It had appeared from nowhere, sliding behind them like a shadow hunting prey. Its movements were deliberate, aggressive, impossible to ignore. The driver in the back seat of John's car flinched, but John didn't speak. His gaze locked on the SUV, recognition flaring instantly in his mind. Someone did not want him to reach that hospital. Someone was interfering with his path, with his destiny, with blood he had not even seen yet. Rage, cold and hard, ignited inside him, mingling with fear to form something unstoppable. John reached for the concealed holster at his side without breaking eye contact. His gun gleamed under the dim interior lights of the armored car, a promise of retribution. His fingers gripped it tightly, not trembling, but alive with controlled violence. "Drive faster," he growled, his voice low, a predator whispering in a storm. The driver obeyed, tires screeching as the car accelerated, slicing through rain streets. Every red light, every puddle, every shadowed corner felt like a threat. And John knew instinctively that each second counted. Behind him, the SUV mirrored their movements perfectly, too precise to be coincidence. Someone was skilled. Someone was trained. Someone wanted him stopped, dead or delayed. The interior of the car became a cocoon of tension. Luca leaned slightly forward, scanning the rearview mirror, eyes flicking between John and the pursuing vehicle. "Boss, they're not just following, they're hunting." The words were barely audible over the storm and the roar of the tires. But in the silence that followed, they landed like bullets. John's grip on the wheel tightened. He had faced gunmen, assassins, betrayals, and ambushes before. But this was personal. This was blood. Blood he hadn't yet held. Blood that someone was playing with cruelly. His mind raced through every possible scenario. He calculated, measured, prepared. But time, for once, wasn't a friend. The black SUV suddenly closed the gap, cutting dangerously close to the armored car. John's teeth clenched. Rain streaked down the windshield in chaotic rivers, blurring the attacker's face. His gun slid from the holster into his hand, every movement precise, rehearsed, lethal. The vehicle swerved to avoid an incoming truck, tires skidding on the wet asphalt. But John's eyes never left the SUV. He could feel the bullets, the intent, the threat like a pulse against his own. The rain hammered down harder, drowning out everything but the roar of the engine, the storm, and the unrelenting beat of his own heart. Every turn felt like a trap. Every intersection a potential ambush. John's mind, normally a steel fortress of strategy, now raced with a singular terrifying thought. Someone is targeting my family. Someone is threatening my bloodline. And I don't know why. Fear mingled with rage in his veins, igniting a clarity that was as sharp as a knife. He had left Julia to protect her. He had abandoned everything he loved to shield them from his world. And now that choice had come back to haunt him in the most unforgiving way imaginable. The SUV fired the first shot without warning. The bullet shattered the back window of the armored car in a violent explosion of glass. Rain, water, and fragments sprayed across the interior. The impact jolted the car violently, throwing John against the steering wheel. He barely had time to react. Gun aimed instinctively at the pursuing vehicle. The world outside became a blur of black, flashing red and yellow from traffic lights and the chaotic reflection of neon signs. He could hear Luca's sharp intake of breath. The driver swore under his breath, eyes wide, but John remained focused, a predator in motion. Glass continued to rain down from the shattered back window. John's heart pounded, every muscle in his body coiled and ready. He calculated every angle, every possible trajectory of the next bullet. The SUV's movements were aggressive but predictable. They were skilled, but skill alone could not outrun instinct, and John's instincts were honed sharper than any blade in his empire. Every second felt like a knife against time itself. The rain soaked through the interior, mixing with the cold sweat that ran down his back. He had one goal. Reach that hospital alive and understand why someone wanted his blood, his child, and the woman he had left behind. The bullets continued to fly, each one a violent punctuation in the symphony of chaos. John maneuvered the armored car with uncanny precision. Tires screeching on the slick roads, dodging obstacles and anticipating the shooter's moves like a chess master, anticipating an opponent 5 steps ahead. His gun never left his hand. He fired methodically. Precise shots meant to warn, to dissuade, to eliminate threats if necessary. Every pull of the trigger was fueled by the raw, unbearable knowledge that someone had targeted his family, his legacy, and that failure was not an option. Amid the storm, John's mind flashed briefly to Julia, to Max, to the thought that he might be too late. The nurse's words rang in his ears again. The boy might not make it through the night. The weight of that sentence crushed him, sharpened his focus, and fueled an almost feral rage. Every turn, every swerve, every heartbeat was a countdown to a revelation he wasn't sure he wanted, and yet couldn't avoid. The rain blurred into streaks of silver and black. The night screamed, and above it all, John Rafe drove. Hunted and hunter at once, knowing that what awaited him could destroy everything. Or make him confront a truth he had been running from for years. 3. The armored car skidded to a halt at the hospital entrance. Rain plastering Jay's hair to his forehead, water running down the sides of his face like liquid ice. The shattered back window left a jagged reminder of the danger trailing him. But he didn't pause. He didn't give himself a second to feel the sting of fear or the heat of adrenaline. His body moved automatically, trained for precision. Yet driven by a force far stronger than strategy. Urgency. He leapt from the car, leather coat slick with rain, boots splashing through puddles, and charged into the sliding glass doors as though they were the threshold between life and death itself. Nurses and visitors froze, their eyes wide at the sight of the man who commanded terror in the streets, now moving like a man possessed by something infinitely more personal. The smell of antiseptic hit his nostrils immediately, sharp and cold, cutting through the humid stench of rain. Monitors beeped frantically in the background, alarms muted by walls, but unmistakable. He ignored everything. The stares, the whispers, the questions. Every second mattered. His eyes scanned the chaos, trained to assess threats, to anticipate violence. Yet nothing had prepared him for the dread he felt, the sense that every heartbeat could be the last one he had to reach the boy. Glass shards from the armored car had tracked water and rain into the lobby, leaving faint scratches across the pristine tile. John barely noticed. He barely registered. His focus narrowed to one point. Julia, where is Julia Rafe? His voice wasn't just a question. It was a demand. An avalanche of authority and desperation rolled into one. The words cut through the tense silence of the emergency floor. People jumped aside instinctively, not out of fear alone, but because the room itself seemed to bend around him. A storm manifest in human form. Nurses whispered among themselves, glancing at each other. But no one dared speak until a doctor stepped cautiously forward, hands raised slightly in the universal gesture of truce. "Sir, follow me," the doctor said, his voice low, hesitant, as if the words themselves carried a warning. John didn't hesitate. He didn't even breathe. His lungs temporarily frozen in a taut anticipation that made the world move slower around him. He followed the doctor through a corridor of clinical white walls, the sound of his boots echoing in sync with his own heartbeat, the storm outside fading into distant percussion. Every door they passed, every nurse who glanced up seemed to blur, insignificant in comparison to the tiny figure awaiting him in the next room. When the door to the pediatric emergency room swung open, John's world stopped. Julia sat at the edge of a small hospital bed, her shoulders slumped, pale as porcelain under the harsh fluorescent lights, eyes swollen and red from crying. Her hands clutched the tiny fingers of Max, the small boy who, even through tubes and monitors, exuded a fragile, unspoken resilience. He looked so small, so impossibly innocent, yet familiar. The moment John's gaze fell on him, a shiver ran down his spine. The child's face, his features, the shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw, mirrored his own childhood photos in a way that felt like a cruel, impossible joke. Julia's head lifted, eyes meeting his, burning with a mixture of grief, fury, and something raw that rattled Jay's defenses immediately. "You're late," she whispered, her voice breaking. The words small but loaded with the weight of every year he had been absent. Her lips trembled. Her hands shook as she held Max tighter, as though keeping him close could shield him from all the years John had missed. The truth of the moment hit him like a freight train. She had been protecting him from knowing, and he had been blind, absent, unaware. John's knees weakened. He staggered, almost collapsing into the sterile floor, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Every rational thought evaporated, leaving a raw, aching void where logic should have been. Julia's gaze never wavered. She let him approach slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Every step John took felt like walking through fire. His chest ached, his hands shook, and yet he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. The boy, Max, was more than just a child in peril. He was the embodiment of a truth he had run from, a bloodline he had never claimed. A responsibility he had avoided, but could never escape. "John." Julia's voice was quieter now, almost a whisper meant for him alone. "He's your son." The words landed on him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. His mind screamed with disbelief, with denial, with recognition, and yet the evidence stared him in the face. Max's small, fragile hand resting in Julia's, the rise and fall of his chest, the faint tremor of fear and pain, the pale reflection of John's own childhood features. He fell to his knees beside the bed, gripping the edge of it as if holding on could anchor him to reality. The magnitude of the moment struck harder than any bullet ever could. A force of truth that left him shaking, fractured, vulnerable. John's vision blurred, not with tears, not yet, but with shock, with the unbearable weight of years lost. He could feel every missed birthday, every laugh never shared, every moment of his child's life stolen from him by absence. Julia's hands gripped his, her eyes searching his face for some recognition, some understanding, some spark of connection that she feared might have died along with hope. And yet, as fragile as the scene was, there was power in it, too. The power of truth, of revelation, of a bond that neither time nor distance could sever. Then, without warning, Max gasped, a weak, fragile sound barely audible. Yet, it pierced the room like a flare in the darkness. The monitors erupted instantly, alarms shrieking through the air, red lights flashing, nurses shouting over each other, machines beeping at a frantic pace. John's heart lurched violently in his chest. Muscles coiling instinctively, instincts honed for survival, kicking in even now, even in this emotional chaos. Julia screamed, the sound, raw, guttural, cutting through the sterile hospital air. John leaned over the bed, hands gripping Max's tiny shoulders gently but firmly, his own breathing ragged and shallow. "It's okay, Max," he whispered, voice breaking. "Daddy's here. I'm here now. Don't go." The words felt foreign on his lips, yet they carried a depth of truth that nothing else could convey. Julia's tears fell freely, wetting both of their shoulders as she leaned over, bridging the gap between father and child in a moment, both fragile and unbreakable. Even in the chaos, John noticed every detail. The fine lines on Julia's face. The way Max's small chest heaved against the chest strap of the heart monitor. The tremor of her hands. The way the alarm seemed to sync with the terror in his own chest. Everything converged into a single truth. He was too late to save the innocence of the boy's past, but not too late to fight for the seconds left in the present. His mind raced with questions he couldn't voice, plans he couldn't form, but instincts carried him forward. Each beep, each flash of red light, each tiny movement of Max's fragile body reminded him of the urgency, the peril, the stakes that had never been higher. His heart fractured under the weight of revelation, of love delayed, of life and death hanging in perfect balance. He could not falter. He could not fail. As he leaned closer, whispering to Max and feeling the fragile pulse of life beneath his fingers, the boy gasped again, louder this time, and the alarms crescendoed in a terrifying symphony of urgency. The room seemed to tilt, spin, collapse inward and outward simultaneously. Nurses shouted commands. Doctors darted between machines. And Julia clung to both of them. Her arms trembling, her voice breaking in prayers, in hope, in despair. John's mind raced, heart hammering, awareness stretching beyond rational limits. And then, in the middle of this chaos, a shadow flickered across the corner of Jay's vision. A fleeting movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to ignite the first spark of suspicion. Someone was watching. Someone had followed. Danger was not yet over. The alarms, the storm outside, the fractured glass from the car. None of it mattered. What mattered was the boy, the woman, and the knowledge that someone had engineered this moment to bring fear, to draw blood, to manipulate. Max's small hand twitched in Jay's, fingers weakly curling around his. A faint moan escaped the boy's lips, and John felt a surge of desperate, raw emotion unlike anything he had ever known. Every second stretched unbearably long. Every second could be the last. The truth he had been running from for years pressed down upon him like a weight of stone, and in that instant John knew with certainty nothing would ever be the same again. The room shook with urgency. Yet John remained still, locked in a fragile bubble of connection with his son and Julia. Every heartbeat was magnified, every breath measured, every alarm a countdown. And then the final piercing moment. Max gasped one more time, weak, fragile, yet undeniably alive, and the entire room erupted in chaos around them. John's world teetered on the edge of revelation and tragedy. The fragile line between life and death, sharper than any blade he had ever faced. The alarm screamed around John like a chorus of panic. Red lights flashing, reflecting harshly off the walls of the pediatric room. Nurses and doctors moved with frantic precision, their shouts sharp, slicing through the chaos. "Give him another dose. Watch the airway. Keep him stable." Every command, every hurried movement only heightened the sense of urgency. John felt frozen, rooted to the floor at the foot of Max's bed, his mind unable to process the whirlwind around him. Rain from earlier still clung to his coat, dripping onto the tile, but he barely noticed the wetness. The chaos of the hospital faded against the singular gravity of the boy in front of him, his son, his blood, the life he had never known, held now at the edge of the world. A nurse, young but resolute, stepped forward, placing her hand lightly on John's shoulder. "Sir, he needs his father. He needs you here." The words were soft, pleading, yet carried a weight that no amount of orders or authority could deflect. John felt his knees weaken slightly, his chest constricted painfully as the realization hit him. He had missed it all. Every birthday candle he would have lit, every laugh he would have shared, every scrape, every tear, every whispered bedtime story, all stolen by his absence. And now the first moment he could reclaim, the first touch he could offer as a father came at the edge of life itself, where every heartbeat was a fragile victory against time. The room was flooded with antiseptic smells, the mechanical beeps of monitors, the rhythmic hiss of oxygen, the sharp scent of adrenaline and fear. John stepped closer, unsteady but determined. His gaze locked on Max, so small and fragile. Pale under the hospital lights, tubes running from every conceivable angle. Wires tethering him to machines that screamed for his life. And yet, despite the overwhelming chaos, there was a spark. Tiny, tentative, human. John reached for Max's tiny hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they met the boy's skin, the warmth so faint against the cold sterility of the room. Max's eyelids fluttered, and the faintest recognition flickered across his pale face. His small, weak voice emerged, barely audible, yet searing through John's soul. "Dad." The single word, fragile as glass, yet sharp as a blade, sliced through every layer of armor John had built over decades. Years of cold, calculated control, of power and fear, of strategy and ruthlessness, all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability that threatened to consume him. John's vision blurred, chest tight, and the dam he had maintained for years broke. He collapsed forward, tears streaming freely, mingling with the rain, still clinging to his coat and hair. "Daddy's here, Max. I'm right here. Please stay with me," he whispered, voice breaking, quivering under the weight of years stolen and moments lost. Each word carried the unbearable weight of regret and love intertwined, reaching out across time, across absence, across the chasm that had separated him from his son. Julia, trembling violently, wrapped her arm around both of them, a fragile anchor amid the storm of medical urgency and raw emotion. Her tears fell onto both of them, soaking John's coat, Max's tiny chest, and the sterile sheets beneath them. For the first time since his son's collapse, Max's breathing became softer, calmer. The irregular jerks of his chest slowed. His small fingers curled gently around John's hand, and for a few fleeting impossible minutes, there was peace. A fragile, trembling peace, a stillness in the chaos, as if Max, even in his weakness, recognized the presence of the father he had never known. The monitor's beeping, once frantic and terrifying, became a gentle rhythm, syncing with John's ragged heartbeat. The room seemed to breathe collectively, nurses pausing mid-step, doctors holding their place, the storm outside fading into insignificance. John's eyes never left Max. He traced every line of his face with his gaze, memorizing each delicate feature, the curve of his lips, the faint tuft of hair falling over his forehead. He felt the weight of the years he had missed. Each memory of absence pressing into him like lead, but now tempered by the miracle of presence. He whispered softly, recounting every imaginary moment he had imagined in secret, the lullabies, the bedtime stories, the quiet words of reassurance he had longed to give. And though the boy was too weak to respond fully, his hand squeezed John's ever so slightly. A fragile promise of connection, a flicker of life amid the storm. Julia's sobs were quiet now, a trembling undercurrent beneath John's murmurs. Her face was pressed close to Max, but her eyes never left John, observing, weighing, acknowledging the bond forming before her in the most impossible circumstances. She whispered encouragement, prayers, memories, everything a mother could offer when the world teetered on the brink. The three of them together formed a fragile triangle in the room, a fragile constellation of grief, hope, and raw emotion. Suddenly, without warning, Max twitched violently. His tiny chest shuddered. The monitors around them erupted into alarm again, shrill and unyielding, cutting through the fragile bubble of calm. Nurses leapt into action, shouting commands, adjusting lines, holding IVs, trying to stabilize him. Jay's hand remained clasped around Max's, fingers trembling, knuckles white with desperation. Every second stretched into eternity. Every breath a gamble. Every heartbeat a negotiation with fate itself. John leaned closer, whispering urgent, fragmented reassurances. Stay with me, Max. Just a little longer. I'm not leaving. I won't leave. His voice shook raw and unfiltered, carrying the weight of every lost day, every moment he had missed, every tear he had never wiped. Julia wrapped both of them in her arms, shielding, comforting, yet powerless against the tiny body fighting for life. The room felt suspended in time, a suspension between hope and despair, life and death, past regrets and future possibilities. The storm outside began to drum again against the hospital windows, a soft, relentless rhythm that mirrored the pulse of tension in the room. Each flash of lightning illuminated Jay's anguished face, Julia's trembling form and Max's frail, fragile body. Every detail was seared into Jay's mind. The curve of Max's tiny ear, the flutter of his lashes, the rapid rise and fall of his chest, the sterile scent of the hospital mixed with the faint hint of fear in the air. And then the monitors flattened, the alarms cut out, leaving an eerie, suffocating silence. John's hand, which had never let go, slipped from Max's fragile fingers. The tiny boy's body went still, a cold absence of motion that made the air itself thicken. Julia screamed, a raw, piercing sound that echoed off the walls, rattling every nerve in Jay's body. He lunged forward instinctively, gripping Max, shaking him gently, whispering words of life he didn't know could be enough. Time fractured. Each second stretched endlessly. The room spun in surreal slow motion. The smell of antiseptic, the rain outside, the sharp cries of nurses, the shaking of Julia's arms, the cold hardness of the hospital bed, all merging into a single unbearable point of focus. John's mind raced through every possible scenario, every action, every desperate move that could save his son. His heart beat so violently he thought it might burst. His hands soaked with sweat, trembling but steady in their grip on Max. A nurse yelled for a crash cart. Another began chest compressions. Julia clung to John, pressing her face against his shoulder, whispering prayers, tears streaking down her cheeks. The chaos became a whirlwind around the fragile triangle of father, mother, and son. Yet John's entire being focused on one small hand, one fragile life, one possibility of salvation. He whispered again, softly, but with ferocious determination, I'm right here, Max, stay with me. Don't leave me. Not yet. Lightning flared outside, briefly illuminating the room, the monitors, the faces of everyone present. And in that moment, John realized that everything, every choice, every regret, every action he had ever taken had led him to this single pivotal point. The weight of his empire, the power, the fear, the danger. None of it mattered compared to this. Max's tiny hand twitched slightly again. A faint pulse of life returning as though responding to the desperate unwavering presence of a father who had finally arrived. The world remained suspended, fragile but alive, hanging by the meaest thread between despair and miracle. And for John, the realization was profound. Life, family, love, raw, unfiltered, unstoppable had found him in the darkest possible moment. Time froze the moment Max's tiny hand slipped from Jay's grasp. The flat line on the monitor screamed louder than any gunshot, harsher than any explosion. The piercing sound cutting through Jay's chest like a blade. The hospital walls seemed to vanish. The world reduced to a single unbearable point of agony. John's knees buckled as the wordless scream of a father ripped from his throat. Primal, guttural, more violent than any command he had ever issued on the streets. Max, he screamed again, voice raw, ragged, echoing down the sterile corridors. Nurses rushed forward, trying to restrain him, to calm him, to explain that everything possible was being done. But John heard nothing. Every instinct in him, every sinew of his body, every ounce of his being shattered in that instant. The unstoppable Mafia boss, the man who had walked through bullets and betrayal without flinching, was reduced to a trembling, broken shell, a man stripped of control, of power, of purpose. Julia collapsed over Max, her arms wrapping around him as though shielding him from the world could somehow bring him back. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She didn't move. She simply stayed frozen, rocking slightly, stroking his hair, murmuring incomprehensible fragments of love and apology that were drowned in tears. The sheets were soaked, her own sleeve drenched in the water of grief that flowed freely, uncontained, unstoppable. John's eyes locked on the scene, and for a heartbeat he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't accept that this fragile boy, his son, was gone. Every memory of absence came crashing back with cruel precision. The birthdays he had missed, the first words he had not heard, the first steps he had not witnessed. Every day of life that had been stolen from him surged into a blinding wave of pain. Rage and despair collided violently inside him. He lashed out at the wall nearest him, punching with such force that knuckles split, blood dripping into the puddles of sweat and tears pooling on the floor. The sound of shattering skin against the wall was a grotesque punctuation to the grief consuming him. Julia finally managed to sit upright, eyes wide, pale, trembling as she lifted a small object from Max's backpack. John noticed the change immediately, the shift in her expression from raw despair to a horrifying realization. He didn't just get sick. Someone did this, she whispered, her voice low, trembling, cutting through the chaos. The words struck John like lightning, freezing him in place. Every ounce of breath left his lungs, every instinct of control collapsed under the weight of horror. He staggered backward slightly, hands shaking violently, unable to process what she had just said. Julia handed him the small vial, glass glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. The liquid inside was clear, deceptively innocuous. Yet John recognized it instantly. Every instinct screamed the truth. This was no accident. This was murder. Carefully, methodically, someone had poisoned his son. A slow neurotoxin known in the criminal underworld for its precise lethality. His hands trembled as he held the vial, eyes darkening, pupils shrinking with an icy fury that had no precedent. The calm, measured control that had made him feared in every corner of the city now redirected itself inward, igniting a storm of vengeance he had never felt before. He could feel the rage building, creeping up from his chest to his jaw, wrapping around his fingers. Every muscle in his body coiled like a predator, ready to strike. Yet the storm of grief held him in place, raw, unrelenting. He looked down at Max, at the small form lying fragile and still on the bed, at Julia's trembling body pressed close, and his soul fractured entirely. Someone had taken from him what he could never replace. Someone had crossed a line he could never forgive. The room around him blurred. The monitors, the alarms, the rushing nurses, the sterile walls, all faded into a background haze. Only the vial in his hand, the memory of Max's tiny hand, and the revelation of deliberate cruelty held focus. He turned to Julia, voice low, hoarse, trembling with a mixture of sorrow and rage. Who would do this? His question hung in the air like smoke, unanswered, yet the fear behind it was palpable. Julia swallowed hard, trembling violently as she whispered the words that made the room colder than any winter storm. The poison. It's the same one your brother used ago. Her voice shook, eyes wide with horror and dread, yet calm enough to leave no doubt. The revelation hit John like a physical blow. His hands tightened around the vial, knuckles whitening as the blood in his veins turned to ice. Betrayal, blood, family. His own brother had returned from the shadows of memory to destroy what John held most dear. The storm outside the hospital mirrored the storm inside his chest. Thunder rolled, rattling the windows, water running down the glass in thick streams. John's pulse raced, not just with grief, but with the beginnings of cold, calculated fury. His mind, trained in violence and strategy, began spinning, running through scenarios, tracing possibilities, calculating every step, every move Adrian could make, every trap that might have been set. He was beyond desperation. He was entering a realm of raw, unfiltered vengeance, where grief and rage merged into a singular force of nature. Julia's hand trembled as it touched his arm, bringing him back momentarily from the spiraling abyss of fury. She whispered again, voice quivering but sharp. John, he did this. He wanted Max gone. Her eyes locked on his, pleading for control where there was none, begging for reason in a world where none existed. John's body shuddered violently, the dual weight of horror and rage threatening to shatter him entirely. He wanted to scream, to strike, to destroy. Yet every instinct told him to focus. He had to understand before he could act, and act with precision if he was to survive the coming storm. The room was eerily quiet except for the faint, almost imperceptible drip of fluid and the shallow hiss of oxygen. John's gaze fell again to Max, to the still, fragile body he had failed to protect, and he felt a hollow ache, a wound deeper than any bullet, any knife, any betrayal he had endured in his life. The realization that his own bloodline, the life he had created, had been targeted, poisoned, and destroyed by someone he once called family, struck with a magnitude that left him breathless. Tears streaked down his face, unheeded, uncontrolled. He had been strong, untouchable, invincible in the world of power and fear. But now he was reduced to a father, vulnerable and shattered, staring at the lifeless body of the boy he should have protected. He gritted his teeth, jaw tight, the muscles in his arms coiling as he looked at Julia, her hands still resting on Max, her face pale but determined, and he made a silent vow. No one would escape. No one. Not this time. John's eyes turned dark, colder than they had ever been. A fire ignited in their depths. A meticulous, calculating fury honed over years of power, sharpened now by grief, sharpened now by loss. He held the vial tightly, and though it was small, it was proof, a tangible symbol of the cruelty directed at his family. Every instinct, every memory, every ounce of his deadly precision coalesced into one purpose. The person responsible would pay, and he would ensure it. He looked at Julia, voice low, but trembling. He's gone. But I'll make sure no one else touches us. No one. Not your brother, not anyone. She nodded weakly, tears still falling, and together they remained over Max, frozen in a cocoon of grief, the air heavy with the weight of betrayal and rage. The hospital lights flickered. Shadows danced across the room. Outside, thunder crashed again. The storm was both outside and within, mirroring the chaos in John's soul. He felt a prickling along his skin, a reminder that danger was never truly absent. And that Adrienne's reach, his cunning, his obsession with destruction could still manifest. Every nerve in John's body sharpened, every muscle coiled. He took a deep breath, the first step in regaining control, in channeling his grief into something unstoppable. The fire inside him was no longer merely anger. It was strategy, precision, vengeance, waiting to strike. Julia whispered again, barely audible. "John, it's the same poison your brother used years ago." The words reverberated through him, cementing the knowledge. The betrayal was personal, calculated, intentional. The war was not over. It had only begun. John's fingers tightened on the vial, crushing it slightly in his hand, shards of glass biting his skin. He turned away from Max's bed for the first time since the flatline. Eyes scanning the room, scanning the shadows, scanning the world that had dared to take his son. He would hunt. He would destroy. He would reclaim what was stolen, no matter the cost. And in that instant, the unstoppable Mafia boss, the man feared by countless enemies, died inside, replaced by a father consumed entirely by grief and vengeance. The storm outside raged on. The room was silent except for Julia's quiet sobs. The world had ended for them in that small room. But from the ashes of Max's death, a fury began to rise. Precise, lethal, unrelenting. 6. The storm outside had not relented. Rain hammered against the hospital windows in violent sheets. The wind rattling the glass like 1,000 whispers of warning. Inside the room, John's hands were still clenched around the crushed vial, knuckles white, his breath ragged, every muscle in his body throbbed with tension. The raw ache of grief and fury coiling into a storm that threatened to consume him entirely. Julia, still trembling, pressed herself against him. Her sobs quiet but relentless, a fragile tether keeping him connected to the fleeting remnants of life they had shared with Max. John's mind raced. The fragments of horror from the past minutes colliding with the emerging truth. He could feel every second stretching into an eternity, the room closing in with the oppressive weight of betrayal and revelation. Then Julia's voice cut through the haze, low and measured despite the tremor beneath it. "John, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Her hand rested lightly on his chest, but her gaze burned into his, determined to force him to hear the truth. He straightened, every nerve alert. Tell me, he demanded, his voice cracking slightly under the weight of anger and grief. Julia swallowed, glancing at Max one last time before meeting his eyes. It was Adrian, she whispered, the name slicing through the room with the precision of a blade. Your brother, he's responsible. The words hit John like a sledgehammer. Time seemed to slow as the full weight of her revelation sank in. Adrian, his blood, his brother. Memories flashed in vivid, uncontrollable sequences. Adrian's green eyes always glinting with jealousy. The way he had followed her, lingered, manipulated, whispered threats in casual tones, all masked beneath charm. The way he had always wanted to own what John possessed. Respect, power, women, loyalty, and now the ultimate transgression. Not merely a child, his son, his bloodline. Adrian had crossed a line that could never be forgiven, never be excused, never be undone. Rage, cold and merciless, replaced grief in John's chest with a burning, lethal fire. Julia clutched him tighter, her own grief palpable. Yet her voice trembled as she continued. After you left, he pursued me relentlessly. When I refused him, he swore he'd make me pay. And when I rejected him again last week, he promised to erase the mistake you made with John. Her words seemed to echo in the room, bouncing off the walls, colliding with Jay's pulse like gunshots in slow motion. Every syllable was poison. Every pause a dagger twisting in his gut. John's stomach churned violently, bow rising unbidden. He had faced death countless times. Bullets, betrayals, enemies with knives and guns, bombs and bullets. But nothing compared to this. This betrayal from his own blood, from someone he had once trusted, someone who shared his name and his lineage, was beyond comprehension. The world shifted beneath him. For a brief, terrifying moment, he felt untethered, suspended in the storm of revelation, rage, and grief. Julia's tears wet his shoulder as she pressed closer, trembling violently. It happened yesterday. Max came home from school fine at first, but soon after he collapsed. At first, I thought it was a virus or something accidental, but then I found out Adrian had been there pretending to be Max's uncle visiting the school. Her voice cracked and she whispered against his chest, I should have protected him. I failed him. We both failed him. John's vision blurred. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him, the world bending and stretching. His son, his only son, had been destroyed by the hand of the one man who shared his blood, the one man he had once called family. Rage twisted violently with grief, coiling around his heart and lungs, squeezing the air from his chest. Every instinct he had honed in the criminal underworld screamed at him to hunt, to strike, to annihilate. Yet he couldn't move. Not yet. The knowledge alone was enough to paralyze him, to make him acutely aware of the fragility of life and the treachery of trust. Julia's trembling hand moved to his, clutching it as if anchoring him, trying to stop him from collapsing entirely. John, he planned it. He wanted Max gone. He wanted to hurt you. He wanted you to watch him die. Her voice was soft, but each word hit like a hammer against iron. John's hands tightened around hers, his body trembling with rage and helplessness. The room seemed to shrink, closing in as he fought to contain the storm threatening to erupt from his chest. He felt Bao rise again, his stomach twisting, heart hammering against his ribs. Every memory of Adrian, the taunts, the manipulations, the envy surged forward with terrible clarity. The subtle threats disguised as jokes. The jealousy hidden behind smiles. The obsession with domination, with power, with Jay's life, and now the ultimate transgression, murder. His child, his bloodline. The rage was no longer abstract. It was sharp, tangible, a weapon coiling inside him, ready to strike. John's eyes darted around the room, alert despite the storm raging inside him. Every shadow, every flicker of movement, every subtle shift in the hospital's sterile environment made him tense, ready. Adrian was clever. He had always been clever. The knowledge that his brother could still be near, still dangerous, amplified the terror and urgency of the moment. Every instinct told him that the battle was far from over, that the war had only just begun. Then his phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. Every muscle in Jay's body tensed instantly. The world narrowed to the device in his hand, the small vibration vibrating through his very bones. With shaking fingers, he pulled it out. His heart stopped. The screen displayed a message, a photo. Adrian holding a gun, smirking, standing inside the very hospital they occupied. The image was crystal clear, brutal, undeniable. The blood in Jay's veins seemed to freeze. Every instinct, every lesson, every ounce of his criminal precision screamed in alarm. Adrian was here. Adrian was close. John's grip on the phone tightened until the edges dug into his palms. The fury and grief intertwined into a singular focus, blinding and precise. Julia gasped softly, noticing the phone in his hand, her eyes wide with terror and realization. John's entire body coiled, muscles taut, his mind racing through every scenario, every route, every possibility. He could hear the faint echo of footsteps somewhere in the corridors. The subtle vibrations of Adrienne's presence, the invisible tension threading through the hospital air. The room felt charged, electricity in every corner. The monitors beeped, alarms still lingering faintly, the storm outside hammering relentlessly. Jay's mind mapped the terrain, calculated the exits, assessed the threat, every skill honed over decades of navigating the criminal underworld, ready to ignite into action. He glanced at Julia, her eyes wide with fear, her hands still clinging to his arm. She whispered, barely audible. "John, he's inside. He's here to finish what he started." John's jaw tightened. He took a deep, slow breath, feeling the storm in his chest fuse with the storm outside. Rage, grief, vengeance, desperation, every emotion sharpened into a weapon. He pressed a hand to Julia's cheek, voice low and feral. "Stay here. Don't move. No one touches you." He turned, scanning the room. Every shadow, every doorway, every flicker of light. Adrienne's smirk in the photograph replayed in his mind, a mental imprint of menace, obsession, and cruelty. The hospital lights flickered briefly, casting elongated shadows across the room. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint drip of N4, the soft whir of machines, and the subtle heartbeat of a world teetering on chaos. John felt the air thicken, adrenaline coiling tighter around his nerves. Every step Adrian could take, every move he could make, became a tangible threat. Each one meticulously considered in Jay's mind. Julia clutched his hand, whispering, "He's dangerous. He won't stop. Not for anyone." John's eyes narrowed, cold and merciless, the full weight of the betrayal crystallizing into action. "He'll pay for this." John growled, voice low. "Deadly, for Max, for us. He will not survive." Thunder rattled the windows again, the storm outside mirroring the storm inside Jay's chest. Every nerve, every instinct, every ounce of fury and precision was ready, coiled, prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Adrienne's betrayal was complete, personal, and unforgivable. And John knew without hesitation that the next move would be blood, vengeance, and a reckoning that neither brother would forget. The room felt suffocating yet alive with tension. Every heartbeat, every breath, every faint movement of the hospital staff carried potential peril. John's gaze flicked between Julia, the still fragile remains of Max's presence, and the phone displaying Adrienne's smirk. The chessboard was set, the pieces moved into place, and the first strike of the coming war was imminent. John's entire body tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring, ready to strike. The moment the image of Adrian holding a gun flashed in his mind, instinct sharpened to a razor's edge. He pulled Julia behind him, keeping her close, pressing her to the narrow safety of his armored body. Every step he took was calculated, silent, measured. Yet inside him, a storm of rage and urgency roared uncontrollably. The sterile hospital corridors, usually a haven of healing, had transformed into a battleground. The air thick with tension, fear, and the scent of impending violence. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows that stretched across the walls and floors. Every corner seemed darker than the last. Every hallway a potential trap. John's mind raced through the layout of the hospital. Exits, stairwells, supply closets, rooms memorized over countless previous visits. Every scenario, every strategy ran through his mind in rapid succession. He had faced armies, assassins, betrayals, and wars. But this was different. This was personal. Adrian was not just an enemy. He was family twisted and lethal, targeting John's heart and blood in the most calculated way imaginable. The PA system crackled suddenly, emitting a distorted, hollow tone before cutting out completely. The silence that followed was oppressive, suffocating, as if the building itself held its breath, waiting for the carnage to unfold. John's pulse raced, his senses heightened. He scanned every hallway, every shadow, every flicker of movement. Adrian was patient, cunning, cruel. He wouldn't act recklessly. He would wait for the perfect moment, and John knew it. The anticipation of the inevitable clash was as lethal as any weapon. His men had followed him into the hospital, forming a tight perimeter. Luca and 2 others flanked him, their eyes sharp, hands hovering near their weapons. But John's gaze moved constantly. A predator hunting a predator. His mind calculated possibilities. Adrian could be upstairs, downstairs, in a room they had passed. He could strike from above, below, behind, anywhere. And when he did, it would be devastating. John's senses burned with adrenaline. Every sound amplified. The distant beep of a monitor, the faint scrape of shoes against tile, the muted shuffle of hospital staff moving cautiously, unaware of the danger. As they turned a corner, a single gunshot echoed violently, followed almost immediately by a scream from the nurses' station ahead. The sound was sharp, brutal, slicing through the tension like a blade. John's stomach tightened and every instinct screamed at him to move faster. He sprinted ahead, heart hammering, mind sharp, scanning every room as he went. Blood pounded in his ears, drowning out the storm outside. Every step measured against the pounding rhythm of his own heartbeat. Ahead, on the wall of a storage room near the nurse's station, a chilling message had been scrolled in jagged red marker. 1 child down, 1 parent left. The words seemed to bleed into the floor. Raw, menacing, a reminder of Adrienne's twisted mind. Rage ignited in John's veins, so intense that his hands trembled and his jaw clenched until it ached. This was not merely murder. This was calculated terror, a psychological assault designed to break him piece by piece before the physical confrontation even began. John crouched slightly, hand tightening around his weapon. He whispered to Julia, voice low, urgent. "He's hunting you. He won't stop." Her hand tightened around his, trembling, tears glistening in her eyes. But in her voice, beneath the quiver, there was fire, defiance, a refusal to be a victim. "Then let him come," she whispered fiercely, almost challenging the unseen predator. "I won't lose you, too." John leaned forward, pressing a quick, desperate kiss to her forehead. A fleeting moment of love and reassurance amid the mounting bloodshed. The corridor stretched ahead, silent now, except for the distant echoes of the storm outside and the occasional scuff of Jay's boots. Shadows danced across the walls, distorted by flickering lights. Every doorway became a potential threat. Every alcove a possible ambush. John's mind ran on overdrive, replaying every previous encounter with Adrian, every memory of his brother's cruelty, patience, and obsession. Adrian was not reckless. He would not make mistakes. He would exploit every weakness, every hesitation. Another gunshot rang out, this time closer, ricocheting off the walls, metal clanging in a harsh staccato. John flinched, his pulse spiking, but he did not falter. Instead, he pressed forward, scanning, calculating, anticipating. Every step brought them closer to confrontation, closer to the inevitable clash that John knew would be brutal, personal, and unforgiving. The hospital seemed to respond to the tension, the flickering lights casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. A faint scuffing sound came from a stairwell to their left. Subtle, deliberate, a predator, moving unseen. John's senses sharpened, every fiber of his being attuned to danger. He signaled silently to his men who fanned out, weapons raised, eyes alert. Yet even with their presence, John knew this was a chess game, and he was playing against a master. As they approached the main stairwell, another door banged open violently ahead of them. The sound echoed through the corridors, a menacing prelude. John paused, crouched low, gun raised, scanning for movement. Then a faint whisper, cold and familiar, echoed from somewhere above, sending a chill down his spine. "Come find me, brother." The voice was unmistakable. Adrian, smooth, confident, mocking, carrying the weight of cruel obsession. It seemed to reverberate through the building, twisting the very air with menace. John's jaw tightened further, eyes narrowing. He could feel the cold fury coursing through his veins, an unrelenting force that drowned out fear and grief for the moment. He turned to Julia, her hand still clinging to his arm, her eyes wide but resolute. "Stay behind me. Don't move," he commanded, voice low, deadly, filled with absolute authority. Every shadow now seemed alive. Every flicker of movement a potential trap. John moved with precision, calculated speed, scanning, listening. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell above, deliberate, taunting. He could feel Adrienne's presence just beyond sight, orchestrating every moment, drawing John closer into a deadly game. Another gunshot shattered the silence, this time ricocheting off the walls nearby. John dove to the side instinctively, pressing Julia against him, keeping her low, moving as one. The bullet tore a hole in the wall beside them, plaster crumbling, dust swirling in the fluorescent glow. John's heart pounded, mind calculating angles, velocities, every exit, every potential trap. The corridors seemed endless, twisted into a maze of shadows, light, and danger. John's men fanned out around him, forming a protective perimeter. But he knew they were only part of the solution. Adrian was clever, patient, cruel. He would strike when least expected. He would exploit hesitation. He would aim to break John first, mentally before physically. A sudden clatter behind a supply closet made John pivot instantly. A shadow darted, but there was nothing concrete, only the sense of presence, deliberate and malevolent. John's instinct screamed that Adrian was close, watching, waiting, preparing. Every heartbeat felt magnified, stretched into an eternity of anticipation. Every breath heavy with potential danger. John's mind raced. He had to protect Julia. He had to anticipate Adrienne's moves. He had to survive. Every ounce of skill, instinct, and experience sharpened into lethal precision. He advanced cautiously, scanning corners, checking ceilings, analyzing shadows. The hospital had transformed into a labyrinth of menace. Each hallway a potential ambush. Each room a potential death trap. The flickering lights and intermittent thunder amplified the tension. Shadows dancing menacingly across walls and floors. Every sound, a dropped object, a shuffled footstep, a creaking hinge, was amplified in John's mind. Every instinct screamed at him to stay vigilant, to anticipate, to strike preemptively if necessary. Another scream echoed faintly from the floor above. A nurse caught in terror, the sound both chilling and urgent. John paused, listening, analyzing. It was a trap. He knew it. Adrian thrived on chaos, on fear, on control. Every movement now had to be deliberate. Every step calculated. John moved with deadly precision, signaling his men with subtle gestures, advancing toward the stairwell where Adrian had threatened him. Each step brought them closer to confrontation, closer to the inevitable collision of rage, vengeance, and survival. His eyes flicked constantly, analyzing shadows, angles, doorways, every potential threat. Julia whispered, voice trembling, but determined. "John, I'm with you. Just don't let him win." John pressed his hand to her cheek briefly, eyes steely. "He won't. Not now. Not ever." Above them, the echo of Adrienne's taunting voice rang again. "Come find me, brother." It was a challenge, a lure, a twisted promise of violence. John's jaw tightened. The hunt had begun in earnest. Every shadow could conceal death. Every sound could herald attack. And yet, with calculated precision, he advanced, ready to face the monster he had once called family. The storm outside matched the storm inside Jay's chest. The hospital was now a battlefield. Each corridor a gauntlet, every step fraught with danger. The hunter had entered the den, and the hunted was ready. But only one would leave alive. John's boots hit the metal stairwell with a heavy echo as he ascended. Each step vibrating with rage and urgency. The storm outside raged with relentless fury. Rain hammering the city like a drum beat of fate. His coat clung to his body soaked. Cold seeping into his bones, but he barely noticed. His focus was singular. Adrian, the man who had destroyed his bloodline, his son. The very family he had sworn to protect. Every instinct, every muscle, every heartbeat screamed at the confrontation on the rooftop would decide everything. The hospital lights flickered briefly through the stairwell's windows, but they were dwarfed by the darkness outside. The city skyline stretched before him, blurred by sheets of rain, lightning illuminating the jagged buildings in harsh staccato flashes. John reached the final step and pushed the stairwell door open, stepping onto the rooftop, drenched, muscles coiled, eyes sharp as knives. His breath came in ragged gasps, his fingers tightening around the gun he had drawn from his coat. There he was, Adrian, standing at the edge of the rooftop, the rain cascading over his face, soaked clothes plastered to his body. And yet he held himself with the calm arrogance of a predator who believed he controlled the hunt, his face twisted into a cruel smile, a mirror of John's own features, but corrupted by obsession and jealousy. "You took everything that should have been mine," Adrian spat, voice sharp, dripping venom. "Julia, the legacy, the respect. I wanted you to suffer." John's fists clenched so tightly, his knuckles cracked through leather gloves. Fury boiled within him. A scorching uncontainable fire fueled by grief and rage. The image of Max's small face, the warmth of his tiny hand, the softness of his cries, all shattered violently against the truth Adrian had inflicted. "You killed my son," John growled, voice trembling with fury, grief, and a pain so deep it threatened to split him in two. Adrian shrugged casually, as if discussing a trivial inconvenience. "He shouldn't have existed," he said simply, with a twisted grin, as the rain beat down on both of them. The word slammed into John like a thunderclap, severing the last thread of restraint, the last shred of patience, the last fraction of humanity that had kept him tethered to logic. Something inside John snapped. Cold, calculated rage was replaced by pure, unbridled vengeance. Without warning, Adrian lunged. The first clash was a blur of fists, slick from rain, striking flesh and bone. John's years of combat training fused with adrenaline. Every movement precise, every dodge and counter rehearsed. But this was not a game of skill. This was raw personal fury. Every punch John threw carried the memory of every birthday missed. Every lullaby unheard, every tear shed by Julia and Max. Adrian responded in kind. Strength and skill honed in years of rivalry. Each blow a vicious practiced strike. The rooftop became a chaotic battlefield, slick and dangerous. Lightning casting strobe-like flashes across the violent dance. Rainwater sprayed from each impact, mingling with blood as fists collided and bodies twisted in relentless struggle. John's mind sharpened. There was no hesitation. The world narrowed to the man before him and the justice he demanded. Gunshots erupted, deafening, punctuating the storm. John fired once, narrowly missing Adrian, who rolled behind the rooftop's railing, smirk never faltering. The bullets ricocheted, clanging violently against metal and concrete, spraying shards and sparks. Each shot a heartbeat of danger. Each flash of gunfire a pulse racing through Jay's veins. Yet neither brother broke, neither hesitated. This was the culmination of years of betrayal, obsession, and grief. Adrian's mocking laughter cut through the storm, cruel and venomous, designed to wound more than bullets ever could. "Do you feel it, brother? The helplessness, the rage, the pain?" He taunted, knowing every word stoked John's fury to near volcanic levels. John's response was a single controlled breath. Then a sudden surge forward, grappling Adrian with precision, muscles coiled, instincts razor sharp. The fight became a brutal mix of hand-to-hand combat, gunplay, and raw desperation. The storm intensified, wind tearing at Jay's coat, rain blinding him in sheets, lightning flashing like divine judgment. Yet in this chaos, he found clarity. Adrienne's arrogance, his smirk, his cruelty, all of it focused into a singular target. John was not merely fighting to survive. He was fighting for vengeance. For the blood stolen from him, for the innocent life extinguished. Each strike, each maneuver, each shove was a step toward justice, toward finality. Adrienne slashed, a knife suddenly glinting in his hand, aiming for a vital strike. John reacted instinctively, blocking, twisting, disarming him with precise movements honed over decades. Sparks flew as metal clashed against metal. The knife clattered across the wet concrete. John's eyes blazed with unrelenting determination. There would be no mercy. None. The cruelty Adrienne had inflicted demanded blood. The fight reached a brutal crescendo as the brothers grappled near the rooftop edge. The storm howling around them like a chorus of impending doom. John's hands were wet with rain and blood, muscles straining, teeth gritted, heart a wild drum of fury and grief. With a final surge, he overpowered Adrienne, pinning him against the slick concrete, gun pressed firmly against his chest. Every ounce of controlled rage, every moment of strategy, every shred of vengeance coalesced into one perfect instant. "This is for Max," John whispered, voice low, lethal, almost reverent. The gun fired, the sound cracked through the storm, echoing across the city, mixing with thunder and rain. Adrienne's body went limp, eyes wide for a moment, realization and fear etched into features that had once mirrored John's own. Then nothing. Silence, save for the storm and the blood pounding in Jay's ears. John collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, hands trembling. Rain soaked through him, washing away some of the physical remnants of the battle. But the emotional scars remained raw, searing. He stared at Adrienne's lifeless body, the culmination of betrayal, obsession, and rage now ended. The air was heavy, charged, silent, except for the storm and distant city sounds. Turning from the rooftop, John's mind and heart were a chaotic mix of grief and relief. He descended the stairwell swiftly, each step a battle to maintain composure, to control the storm within. Reaching the hospital interior, he found Julia waiting, her eyes wide, tears stray. She ran into his arms without hesitation. He held her tightly, whispering, "I lost my son. But I swear I'll protect what's left of this family." The two of them clung together amidst the chaos. Rain dripping from their soaked clothes, hearts raw, bodies trembling. Police sirens wailed in the distance, approaching, but their sound was distant, almost irrelevant compared to the storm they had survived. Together, they were broken but unbroken, bound by grief, love, and the shared pain of loss. As they left the hospital, tentative steps onto the slick pavement, a nurse approached Julia quietly, glancing around as if afraid to be overheard. "There's something you need to know," she whispered, voice trembling. Julia froze, heart pounding anew. The nurse leaned closer, lips barely moving. Max wasn't the only child. John's hand gripped Julia's tighter, tension surging. The storm around them raged, but inside a new tension, a new mystery, a new thread of fear and anticipation took root. The battle had ended, but the story, their story, was far from over. And that was today's story on Heartwoven Tales. A tale of love, loss, and the lengths one will go to protect family. If your heart raced or if you felt every emotion along the way, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing from you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story that will pull at your heartstrings. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, every story we share is a piece of life's tapestry woven with hope, heartbreak, and lessons that stay with us forever. Until next time, stay strong and keep your heart